then write to them, and people like Carver and Taylor and Bartley and so on. So that was my history. And the hobby became more and more serious because I said, this is stupid. Why don't people understand this? This is so obvious. We need to change things. We need to change minor things like national policies, and even more minor things like the entire structure of business, and even more minor things like how people treat each other and so on. I realized this is actually the crux of a huge change that needs to happen, and that I'm committed, and still am, to make this change happen. But I think I can say now that we are moving forward. I think today, ecological economics and the understanding of nature, not only as our mother, not only as a living fabric of this planet, not only as the home for all species, but also as a contributor towards human economies. That understanding is much wider today than 3 or 5 years ago. A lot of people would agree with that. And I think the TEEP community, with its more than 550 authors, co-authors, contributors, editors, reviewers, and literally thousands of people who've been helping us along the way, I think they've all made a huge, huge contribution to make that change. We're all very different people, by the way. There's quite a wide mix in what we call the TEEP community. Everything from businessmen to ex-bankers to environmental ecologists, ecological economists, environmental economists, some classical economists as well, some pure ecologists, some social anthropologists, and so on. But they all combined with one common sort of goal, which is that they were all concerned about the economic invisibility of nature. And they all felt that it's absurd that people don't recognize or demonstrate or capture the value of ecosystem services, despite it being so obvious in a basic way. And I think that's what binds us all together, that we are concerned about nature. We are concerned that the economic engine that drives us today, the brown economy, is pointing in the wrong direction and still happily chugging along in that direction. So we are basically changing the tracks, and hopefully the engine as well in the process. That's a big aim to have, but that's really how serious and significant TEEP is, and that's why I think all of you, I welcome you here, because in a sense, by participating, you become part of a community of change that needs to go forward. The history of TEEP. Does anyone know that this is actually began with recognition that the Stern Review happened, and that we could do something like this? So it's interesting that the whole world of ecosystem valuation actually owes thanks to Lord Stern and his review and his team, because otherwise they wouldn't have started the project. They had to wait for somebody else to go there, then we had to follow. But that's the history. And of course, initially they called it SIBIOS, standing for the Stern-Inspired Biodiversity Study. It's a very original name. So when I went to meet Lord Stern to invite him to be our advisory board member, I knew him, I met him a few times before. So I said, this is what they want to call the study. And Lord Stern did something like this. So from that I understood that I don't think he likes the name. So then I thought, well, let's find another name. And then we discussed in the group, and we came up with something simple like the economics of ecosystems and biodiversity. So that was the history of the name. It's gone through many stages. It's based on the Millennium Ecosystem Assessments framework. We debated this. Not all of us were very happy with the way that ecosystem services were classified, or the fact that benefits and services were considered as the same thing, because technically and economically they're not. We were not all very happy, including me, but we finally decided as a community that we should stick with it, because otherwise it would create more confusion. So we've actually followed the framework of ecosystem services that has been brought to us by the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment. So it's very much based on that. It very much draws inspiration from the Stern Review. It, of course, depends upon a whole, there's a whole library of information and knowledge on ecological economics already, which has been done for the last 25 years. And more, in fact, if you include the works of Thaler and Mailer and Partha Dasgupta, some of them go back to 40 years. We produced an interim report just to flag the big issues, and then we worked on these reports whose purpose was to reach out to decision makers. So we said this from the beginning, that the TEEP reports are here to make change happen, but the way to make change happen is to explain what the issues are in the language of the decision makers. So there is no point talking about solid economic theory to people on the ground who are changing small policies on the local ground, which makes a huge difference to how nature is conserved or lost. But there's no point giving them big, thick volumes of economic economics to prove that, they won't read, and that will serve no purpose. So we actually decided to write 4 different reports. One for the theoretician, the experts, one which is called the ecological and economic foundations, another that's the dark report, and another one for policymakers, national level, and another one that's the light blue one, and another one for the administrators and the local policymakers, people who are involved in towns, cities, countrysides, and so on, and make policy and changes and plans at that level. That's the red report. And then the golden color report for the corporations, because we thought, they're always very proud of themselves, so maybe it's gold. The 4 colors had been decided. We actually had a big fight as to which report should get which color. But then the logic followed that the light blue is about blue sky thinking, so that must be for the policymakers. And the gold has for the corporation because they think they're tanks. And the red must be for the local guys because they think there's a fire and there's really a problem. And I used to keep hearing this from so many different local guys saying, please, when's your work going to finish? We need those values, we need those numbers, blah, blah, blah. So clearly there's a fire going, so that's red. And of course the dark blue is the old color, the standard original color. Anyway, so then of course these have been converted to reports, and now I think is the actual crunch time. This is, if you like, where the work really begins, which is, okay, how do we convert this thinking, the TEEB approach, which I'll talk a bit about, into the actual work of preparing information which can then be used to calculate the value of ecosystem services. And that's where we are today. So work is going on in country level, in local level, and that's where the SGAs, the sub-global assessments, are very important. Because just like the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment was a global assessment, you need that local information base, you need that understanding of ecosystem services, the key biomes, the key beneficiaries at the local level, to be able to then go to the next stage saying, okay, to whom do these benefits flow? Who is, does it matter socially? Does it matter from an economic perspective? Does it affect poverty? What policies does it affect? So you need to be able to ask those questions by looking at sub-global assessments as storehouses of collected information on the ecosystem services from the biomes which exist globally. So this is a very important step in that direction. You can't actually get the kind of good valuation framework and methodology applied unless you have good, sound ecological information on the ground in the first place. So that's where the SGAs are very important. Country studies in TEEB draw from the SGAs and hopefully other papers and scientific work on ecosystems. And country studies on TEEB feed into things like waves. Has anyone heard of waves out here so far? Yes. Okay, so basically, waves is about taking ecosystem service values and seeing whether there are aggregate level reports, as in reports of national accounts, which don't reflect those values, and then adding them in. And also taking ecosystem services and seeing what has been lost. So if a whole forest is lost or an area of wetland is lost, the present value of all the future flows of those ecosystem services from that forest or from that wetland is also lost. That's a capital loss. That's called depreciation. Right? In the accounts of society, you have to acknowledge depreciation. You have to reflect it. So these sort of calculations come out of the information that has been pulled together by the TEEB study, and they go into reporting on the national accounts, making adjustments. Okay, so it's a nice flow, if you like. The SGA providing the ecological information, sufficient of it, based on the policy priorities, looking at ecosystem services which matter, based on that, doing the sort of evaluation and construction of framework using methodologies, coming out with value numbers, and then integrating those value numbers and the losses which are taking place, or gains, if that is the case, into national accounts and local accounts. That's the sort of chain that happens and should happen as we move forward. But it's a long chain, it's a complex chain, and all of you hopefully will in some way or the other contribute towards that, and that's what we are hoping for. Valuation is not without its challenges and without its emotions and complexities. And we have called, that is TEEB, have called valuation a human institution. It's a human institution no less than, the national frameworks of law. Basically, constitution of countries is a human institution. Taxation is a human institution. Laws of the land are human institutions. Customs are human institutions, and one of those customs is to value. Valuation, therefore, is something much broader than just putting a price on a particular ecosystem service from a location to particular beneficiaries. That's the mechanics of it. But the concept of valuation is much broader. And this is something that doesn't often get understood, because the difference between valuation as a human institution, then understanding that some of that valuation can be done without any reference to economics, then understanding that you can refer to economics, use models, create shadow prices, and create demonstrations of value, actually implement change, have changes taking place without actually anybody buying or selling anything. In other words, no physical cash flows involved. These are subsets of subsets of subsets, but such is our society today, and such is the brainwashing that we have experienced thanks to Milton Friedman and his acolytes, that we think that value is equal to price. I mean, price is value. And in fact, there are some languages where it's the same word. How many people speak Spanish out here? So what is the word for value and the word for price in Spanish? What are
Precio.
Precio, yeah. But we keep hearing the word valor, and yet when people are thinking about it, it's precio. And this is the challenge. How do we get people to understand that actually valuation is not the same as pricing? It's a huge challenge in translation. It gets lost. Whereas what we talk about and what is written about in the TEEP reports is layers and layers. And that is part of the challenge. And very often people think that what we are trying to do is to just attach a price tag to every bee or elephant or bear or whatever, or every ant for that matter. And this is a little cartoon that we sometimes use to illustrate what TEEP is not. So this is not the TEEP perspective of valuation. You can't find a TEEP price tag that attaches to every species or every ecosystem, anything like that. What TEEP's perspective of valuation, and that's kind of fairly well laid out in actually all of the TEEP reports. It's described at a theoretical level, it's mentioned in the policy report, it's described in the administrator's report, and it's mentioned in the business report. That valuation perspective is that actually there are three layers in which valuation takes place. Human beings recognize value. They can recognize value without any reference to anything else other than who they are. So if a tribal community in Himachal Pradesh, India, considers such and such neighborhood forests to be sacred, a sacred grove, then that's it. That means that to them its value is infinity, because to them their ancestor spirits live there, their deities live there, and there's no way that they can destroy it. They would rather die than lose that forest. Way back in the 1900s and even before that, late 1800s, when parks were declared in England and then in the USA and so on, there was valuation going on because people felt the Yorkshire Downs and people felt that the Lake District were highly valuable, and therefore they declared them as national parks for posterity because they valued these as areas which they felt were heritage, and this was part of the patrimony of the society, and that it must be passed on to future generations. So the valuation took place and conservation took place, just recognizing that human aspect, societal aspect of valuation. So you can recognize value and you can take actions on conservation without any reference to economics. It has been done. It is still being done. And then you can demonstrate values. And the classic example which keeps coming up is the Nakigubo swamp outside Kampala, where an IUCN economist actually had done a study on working out the value of that ecosystem as a sewage treatment plant of sorts. And that value was considered 8-10 times higher than the alternative value of converting that swamp into additional area for the use of agriculture and urban expansion. And this swamp is not far away, it's about 8-10 kilometers from the city, so it's not valuable for alternative uses. But it's still there today, conserved as a part of the so-called green belt around Kampala city. And that change in policy between converting the swamp into more land and keeping it as a swamp was the direct result of the valuation study that was fed into the government. So you can demonstrate value and it can have a policy effect without any economics or cash flows or purchases or sales or markets coming into the picture. That's also a key example, and there are many such examples in the TEEP reports. That's demonstration of value. Then finally, in some cases you can capture value. Capturing value means someone pays, someone receives. And once again, it doesn't have to be markets that pay and markets that receive. This does not have to be done on the basis of commoditization. In fact, if we look at payments for ecosystem services, a study was done recently, which I remember said something like 95% of all the PES schemes that they studied were actually government to government or government to local government. So it's basically a price being agreed to engage on certain actions of non-damage to upstream water supply using agricultural practices which do not use that much pesticides and fertilizers, On the one hand, so they are losing some productivity. They are compensated with a certain value by a downstream community who gets cleaner water and therefore has to spend less money on cleaning through municipal supply. So that's a payment for ecosystem services. PES is called a market scheme because that's what people call it. They can call it anything they want, I don't care. The fact is that most of the PES schemes on earth today are between one government agency and another, or one government agency and people on the ground. So they are not actually markets in terms of deep, liquid, volatilized. They are not, there's no question of a commodity here because you can't have a PES between Beijing municipality and the agricultural community north of Beijing, which is traded in India or Pakistan, for example. Right? There's no relevance to that. You can't trade that in any place other than between the two counterparts and at the price that they both agreed across the table. So when people think that's a market, then they must have a funny idea of what a market is, because I've traded markets 25 years in my life, and that's not what markets are like. They're deep, they're liquid, you have identified single types of products that can be traded, and there are prices. So this is markets, and this is what we are talking about. In the TEEP for local administrators, there are kind of 100 plus examples of such payments for ecosystem services. They're also available on the website. If you look at strategies that come out of this understanding of valuation, then you get different types of strategies. Regional planning and legislations can apply at the level of recognizing value. Certification, as in when you certify products, like green products or low damage products or eco-certified or rainforest certified or certified by the Ocean Council and so on. Those are certified products. They have a certain value. You demonstrated that value because it's less damaging and therefore you get a premium. So that's how that works. And then of course there's payments for ecosystem services. And if we then re-examine these 5 types of strategies, we'll find that actually most of them are in the nature of either norms or regulations or policies or economic mechanisms. But they're not actually markets per se. And actually, there are only 2 markets that we have mentioned. One is the wetland banking market in the US, which is tiny and a bit confused. And the other is the biodiversity market in Australia, about which there's not much I can say. So it's not as if there are huge market solutions sitting around the corner, as in proper markets for biodiversity. But there's certainly value in understanding that economics matters. Economics today is the currency of policy. Economics has determined the direction of resource use for a long time, or at least the last 60 odd years, and will continue to do so. And if we ignore that, then it's our fault if biodiversity gets lost, because we are ignoring what is obvious. And that's the point that he was making. That since economics is determining policy, present a more holistic economics to policymakers so that they don't make wrong choices. Because today, they are picking up from an incomplete information base of in front of them for decision making, coming to conclusions such as, we mustn't have this forest because it's bad for development, or we mustn't have this forest because it gets in the way of water supply. And ridiculous answers like that, which clearly anyone with a basic ecological understanding knows that is false. But unfortunately, the information being presented to policymakers has been for the last so many years is not there, and unfortunately, private business incentives accentuate that and play on that and exploit that, and so they will, because the purpose of the corporation is profit. Unless you have a wise policymaker in place with good policies in place and recognition and reward for conservation, in other words, for maintaining biodiversity, there is no way in which corporations today are going to suddenly turn around like a phalanx of knights in shining armor and protect biodiversity because it's a good thing to do. And I've read lots of fairy stories. I don't believe any of them. I'm an anchor, basically. So we're talking about valuation, and valuation is conducted by ecological economists. So anyway, who do you think this group of people is? Take a guess. Any guesses? Just in terms of like, what's their job? Yeah. Pretty good actually. So they are doing basic SGA. They are basically SGA specialists in a small community in the Solomon Islands. Yeah? So they are ecological experts out here. So these are ecologists basically. Their profession is ecologists. They are working out all of the species which are important and valuable to them. So this group of economists, and this is in the Solomon Islands, which has a very high diversity and has had significant biodiversity loss, and there's significant logging going on and so on. And the challenge there seems to be how to get local communities better engaged and more heard. In other words, the voice of the local community should be more heard in a way that is formal, so that it can influence the change in what is happening there. Because the change that is happening is extremely damaging, not just to biodiversity, but also to the local communities. They are losing soil fertility, they are losing access to forests, availability of species that are part of their lives. So here's another group of people. Who do you think these are? Sorry?
Some are economists there.
These are economists, yes. So the previous lot was ecologists, the ones who were working out which species are there and what are they important. These are economists because you can see they've actually written down the names of all those things. You can't see any leaves anymore lying around. But on those papers, they are constructing a choice experiment, a deliberative choice experiment, and on those pieces of paper which represent those species and products, you can see stones. Those stones are units of value. They are theoretical units of value, but they are units of value, and therefore this is a valuation experiment. It's been conducted by economists, so these are not school children. Come on, don't be dismissive. They are economists.